So we just got super clear on the difference between adjusting the exposure in your camera versus adjusting the intensity of your lighting. Now, the next thing I wanted to further go into detail of is when it comes to your camera settings, I really urge you to try to always shoot manual. That way, everything that's in camera, what's getting actually recorded to your camera's sensor is as neutral and as correct to the naked eye as possible. And to further explain that point, what I mean by that is that, this lighting source is 5600 Kelvin. So that's the amount of warmth and coolness that this has. My camera is set to a proper manual settings to make the light on me not too blue and not too orange, but just right so that my skin tones are as real to the naked eye as possible. That way, when we are in post-production and editing, our workflow is going to be a lot faster and a lot more easy to do because we're not trying to fix stuff in post-production. The footage that we have in our camera is as accurate as possible to real life. That leads to the next thing, which is about understanding the lens that you're shooting with, the maximum aperture that that lens has, and then also the max ISO number that your camera has that you can go up to without really degrading the footage too much. And each camera is different. So let's talk about the lens aspect first. Now, the maximum aperture for this camera is 2.8. So that means I'm in focus and the background is pretty blurry. If I were to switch lenses and bring down the maximum aperture by increasing the opening of the lens and bring it to 1.8, the image behind me then gets more blurry. So you want to know the maximum aperture of your lens, because the wider of an aperture, the lower the number. It's kind of confusing because it's backwards. It's kind of backwards. The lower the number, the wider the aperture, the larger the opening, the more out of focus the background becomes. So that's really all you need to know when it comes to aperture. Now, the more unique you want your footage to look, the more blurry you want your background to be. That's really what creates depth. That's what creates cinematic images in films that you watch, I was gonna say on the big screen, but we're not doing much of that lately. We're watching films on our freaking computer while we're eating a bucket of ice cream on Netflix. Right, so now moving on to the max ISO number on our camera. So if we put this back to 2.8, there we go. Now that's the aperture. Now the ISO is the amount of boosting the signal that your camera is doing for the light entering your lens. So right now my ISO, it's I think it's 1200 or 1500. That's pretty much the highest I'll put my ISO before there's too much noise. Noise. There's terms grain and noise. That's another topic. But if we zoom in to a part of our image right here, if you zoom in, you can really clearly see what that noise looks like. It looks like a bunch of those tiny dots, which is normal for video cameras. Now, the higher the ISO, the brighter the image, but the more noise, those little tiny dots, you have. Now, if we zoom back out, we see this image. If I increase the ISO, boom, the exposure comes way up. But now if we zoom back into that area, you can see there's way more dots, and it starts to kind of distort the image, and it kind of starts to make it look just not right. You want a really clean looking, well exposed image. So if we zoom back out, boom, we bring the ISO back to its proper level. I found the proper ISO that I don't go above, because once I go above that number, I'm not happy with the way the image looks. So I adjust my lighting accordingly, and I adjust my aperture and my shutter speed accordingly to that max ISO number, which not many people talk about, but I want to bring it up so that you can get comfortable with the aperture on the lens you're using, and you can really understand that max ISO number that you don't want to exceed for your camera and your recordings, so that when you shoot everything and you look back on it and you color correct it and you're like, damn, it looks so grainy, it looks so noisy. It's because you probably exceeded that maximum ISO number. So now that you have a good handle on that, let's get into the next video lesson.